Hello and welcome to this episode of the podcast. We're excited today because we have a special guest and friend, Rivka Gevurtz. Hi, Rivka.
Hey.
I just want to say hi. And Colleen, of course, is here as well.
Hello.
So just a few announcements. I think this is going to be released a little bit later. So you can find any of our stuff, our classes. We teach Holy Fire Reiki classes and ICRT Animal Reiki classes pretty well every other month, for each. So we teach them once a month. So human Reiki is every other month. Animal Reiki is just about every other month. And you can find our class schedule on our website, reikilifestyle.com. Also, we do have our free distance Reiki share, which is every Tuesday morning at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. It's free and open to everyone. And also regardless of experience level. So if you're just wanting to kind of try Reiki out, you can come and join us there. And then if you are watching on YouTube, we do have where we release all of our audio versions of our podcast on all the podcast platforms. So like Apple Podcasts, all of that. And then if you're listening to this, you can also check out everything on our YouTube channel. So in some instances, especially like during the distance Reiki shares and all of those things that we release onto the podcast, you can watch those visually on our YouTube channel, which is Reiki Lifestyle. And then Colleen and I have social media. Colleen is Reiki Lifestyle or Reiki Lifestyle Official, and I am Robyn Benelli Reiki. All right.
I want to do one more.
Yeah, of course.
The Japan class.
Oh yeah, go for it.
I just realized I need to keep talking about the Japan class so people know, because it's actually both of them are almost full. So William Rand and I are teaching together on Mount Karama in April, and we have Holy Fire 3 World Peace Reiki classes on the mountain. They're 7-day classes. We stay in a ryokan inn. The hospitality and the food is remarkable and beautiful, and it's right on the mountain. The gateway is right there. So anyway, that's the beginning of April. You can email me for more information or go to reiki.org and look at the Japan classes there. All right. So I had to mention that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. People want to know.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, let's go ahead and get to Rivka.
Yes, absolutely. So we have known Rivka for quite a while now. How many years has it been, Rivka? Maybe 5?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. And she's a friend and colleague and just all around amazing person. So just to kind of read her bio, and then we'll get into her telling her story. And it's Reverend, right? I want to just make sure. Yeah. Okay. Reverend Theresa Rivka Gevurtz is an interfaith minister, chaplain, and spiritual director, as well as a Reiki master. She now serves as a member of the core faculty at the Chaplaincy Institute, overseeing the Sacred Justice Ministry curriculum thread. Rivka's particular area of focus includes addressing the ways religious wounding impacts not only the queer and BIPOC communities, but those who identify as spiritual but not religious. Her ministry is influenced by the social justice commitment of her Jewish Renewal tradition, faith-based advocacy for the LGBTQ community and the environment, as well as by contemplative and mystical traditions and Reiki energy healing. She has been a public speaker on LGBTQ and environmental issues, spearheading community action initiatives, as well as advocating to legislative bodies. Rivka has led Shabbat in the Woods retreats, service learning collaborations, taught and coordinated at national and local conferences, and served as an adult and child educator in congregational religious education programs. She has written a variety of print media on the intersection of faith and justice. In addition to her role at the Chaplaincy Institute, she provides spiritual direction and related spiritual services in private practice at Shelter for the Spirit. And so Rivka can be reached. Her website is shelterforthespirit.com, and email is rivka@shelterforthespirit.com. And then she has an Instagram, which is Rev Rivka, and Rivka is Rivka. So Instagram is Rev Rivka, Facebook is Shelter for the Spirit, and then she also has a YouTube channel. And would people search Rev Rivka, or would they search Shelter for that?
They search for Shelter for the Spirit.
Awesome. Well, welcome. Again, I think I've said that like 3 times as well as before, but we're just really excited to talk to you. It's been a little while since we've been able to kind of sit down and have a conversation, and a lot has changed. And, you know, we just have so much love in our hearts for you, and also love so much about your story, your work that you do. You know, Rivka really has so much expertise in all of the things that we're going to be talking about today, and all of her work. Just always love your heart and your message and your work. And also we learn so much from you every time we even just have, you know, regular conversations that aren't on the podcast. So really excited to just really listen to you and learn from you today.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Colleen. I did that again.
No problem.
I'm not looking so much like these days that the energy just flows.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
Well, and I am called Robyn all the time because my husband's Robyn also. So people are always calling me Robyn. I just answer to it all.
Exactly. It's no problem. All right. Well, why don't you start off and kind of tell us about your story? Also, you know, what led you to Reiki, but also your general Reiki, and what led you to, I want to make sure I'm saying this correctly, led you to be an interfaith minister.
Mm-hmm. Reiki's been very intertwined with that journey. I was first exposed to Reiki in the mid 1980s when I was working for a residence. It was before we could use hospice, where palliative care was also given. So we had a residence for people with AIDS in New York City called Bailey House that I was the business manager for, and I was involved in AIDS ministry in my congregation. And our lead nurse at Bailey House had studied Reiki, and we found that it made such a huge difference for how those folks who were living with AIDS were able to tolerate the really toxic medication cocktails that were being tried out on them till they found the right combination of things. And we learned, as we do in Reiki, that healing and cure are not always the same thing. But what would happen was, as these people would come to the end of their lives, Reiki did something much more important than just mitigate the symptoms. It helped them reclaim their sense of spirit. It helped them reclaim the pure being that entered this world, so that as they left, it was a heartache every time, whether it was a gay man who had been rejected by his family, or a homeless, drug-affected woman who had to live in survival mode for years. Each of these individuals with Reiki and support and love surrounding them were able to return to spirit healed, even though their body could not sustain that illness. And that had a huge impact on my spiritual journey. At the time, I was a deacon with MCC, which is Metropolitan Community Churches. That was the first denomination for queer folk, and thankfully many different denominations, Christian, Jewish, even Muslim, as well as Buddhism, have in the last 40 years since then embraced queer folk. And yet there's still a lot of religious wounding that because of what families thought was correct based on what they understood about scripture and understood from the technologies of their traditions, And so I've worked for many years now at that intersection of spirit and justice. Hold the hand of someone who is dying, and no one from their family will come to them. You learn in a very deep way that wounding needs to be held, needs to be comforted. And that wounding includes the face of the divine, because people create pain, and they say that it's because they're following the divine's will. And unfortunately, that causes harm for somebody who is vulnerable. So that has been a central part of my work over the years. I did that mostly from a nonprofit perspective for 30 of those years, before finally accepting the call to go fully to seminary and become ordained, and chose specifically to be an interfaith ordination, and to a school that flourishes in interfaith work, the Chaplaincy Institute, located down in Berkeley. They recognize that as do all chaplains, but we recognize that when you're sitting with somebody at bedside, or in prison, or in a shelter, we need to be present for all of who that person is, not have our own spiritual agenda. And so for me, it was very important to receive an ordination that gave me some grounding in the myriad of ways people connect with the divine.
That's amazing. And so when did you receive your ordination, and kind of how has that led to today and Shelter for the Spirit?
Spirit works in amazing ways. I finally finished my ordination in 2018, and originally was going to continue doing the same kind of work I had been doing at that political intersection, but life and COVID and a variety of other things happened in our world since 2018. And I thought I was going to be doing chaplaincy work in the hospice environment. But what I found is that spiritual direction, which looks like therapy, but it's about the relationship between one and their understanding of the divine, however they define that sense of the ineffable. That was such a sweet spot for me. I compare the two, chaplaincy and spiritual direction, as chaplaincy is triage, and spiritual direction is the long-term commitment. It's being with somebody as they wrestle, and witnessing for them, companioning them on their individual spiritual journey. And that just felt to me very in line, actually, with Reiki, because in both cases, we are conduits, we are witnesses for the healing that the divine is working within someone's life who we're companioning.
So then, where are you now? since the pandemic?
I've continued to do spiritual direction and see Reiki clients. Like everybody, we've moved to Zoom. Although in the lulls, we have had some in-person outdoors and safely protected activities. We're blessed here at Shelter to have a covered outdoor space with lots of space heaters that makes it very cozy. That has allowed us to have a variety of programs. And over the course of the last year, I think in part because everyone is so tired and so isolated, there's been a real hunger, and I felt it myself, and in talking with others, a hunger for reconnection. And so over the last few months, and really kicking off this month, we've been asked by others and have stepped into the possibility of creating interspiritual community. One of the things I loved about seminary is because we came from all different faith backgrounds and no faith backgrounds, people who wanted to be chaplains and interfaith stewards for people wherever they are at. And so we were all coming from our own space, but we were engaging in spiritual practice and spiritual inquiry together. And so to me, that was a real gift to see that in action. And I think it's something that you don't have to be heading to seminary for, to be able to really appreciate the idea of coming together in spiritual practice without the dogma. What I like to say is we don't have to throw God out with the holy water. It's, there's as Wayne Dwyer says, we are infinite spiritual beings having a human experience. And having space together to explore what that means, to be in community and not have to give over your thinking capacity and what holds your heart and what has caused pain that needs to be witnessed. So I've been over the last year integrating Reiki more and more into my spiritual direction practice, where it is accepted and invited. It's always up to the client as to what combination is going to speak to them. But through that experience, one of the things that we'll be starting this year is an intentional integration between spiritual direction and Reiki in creating a community event that'll be a combination of Reiki and group spiritual direction, looking at raising up those sparks that need seen, those hurts that need held, whether it's physical, spiritual, or emotional, and creating a variety of different ways of folks to connect in that way. So it's I think we're all in this together in a way that has made our vulnerability very tender. And particularly with folks who've had spiritual wounding, they know they have an innate being and they know they want connection, but they are so turned off by the dogma of their tradition of origin, or maybe not even their tradition of origin. So many people have become spiritual but not religious because they've rejected the tradition of their family and may not even realize that the wounding is generational, that the reason they weren't raised in a congregation or in a spiritual community is because of pain that their parent or their grandparent experienced. But there's still that yearning to come together in community in ways that lift us up. And so in addition to seeing spiritual direction clients and Reiki clients and some of the New Moon and other programs I've done over the years, there's going to be more of a container now so that we're intentional about creating a sense of community.
Amazing.
Well, and it makes such a difference to really combine the Reiki energy, because there's the inner awareness, the self-awareness, the outer awareness, and then the Reiki energy actually can help to reveal their authentic self that is there, that light, that spirit that they are. Mm-hmm. That sometimes is, I think of it as layers of injury that hide people from their own view.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's not only the injury done in our dominant culture, the injuries around white supremacism, the industry around misogyny, all of these different messages that where scriptures have been turned to mean something harmful. We speak in Reiki a lot about the light. It's not uncommon that has been turned into a dichotomy in some traditions where light is good and dark is bad. The luminous dark is that creative void that began everything. We lose sight of that because of the languaging that we are entrained in. And so creating those ways of not negating and not vilifying the dark, the divine feminine, the earth, our very nurturing mother. All of these through Christo-colonizer culture of the last couple of hundred years, 500 years, has really robbed people of their innate knowing of the divine working in the creation around them, the divine working within the feminine archetypes within us and around us that kind of go unnoticed in a patriarchally oriented society that we've lived in. We're starting to see a resurgence and a rebirth of the divine feminine. And in this time where folks like my adult child who are non-binary, we're learning to not think in terms of male, female, light, dark, but to recognize that there is a weaving and sacredness within all ways of being. And so I think many sages have said this, I'm just parroting what others have said, that we are at a time of paradigm shift in the ways that we understand divinity, in the ways that we understand ourselves. And I think the energy of Reiki, the energy of prayer, are important tools. We are energy. The quantum physicists and the mystics all say the same thing. It's fascinating when you study the different traditions, how when you get to the mystical levels of any tradition, even if they have their fundamentalist wings, the mystics of different traditions have far more in common than necessarily the parochial understanding that many people are given in terms of religious education, and then get bored with it at teenage years, leave and never come back. Because it's elementary. It doesn't take them to those levels of inquisitiveness about spirit and wrestling with what scripture really means and how do we apply it in its various traditions to life today. What is useful to us? What is taken out of context and therefore creating harm? So creating those environments where those dialogues can happen and where we can peel back those layers, as you just said, of what has caused the wounding, what has caused the misinterpretations. How do we give those things that have caused harm the healing energy of distance Reiki to heal some of those traumas that have happened in ways that then allow for spirit to flow. For spirit to flow more freely.
Well, and I do, really, I'm very, very aware, I think we all are, of this paradigm shift that is occurring. And I've personally defined it, I say it often, but I've personally defined it as moving out of the age of the outside authority and into the age of the inner authority. In our age group, of course, we were raised to believe what we were told to believe, right, and to do that with an intermediary.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Particularly for those of us who are raised in more conservative traditions. I remember growing up as a little Catholic girl, we barely even opened the Bible at home except to write births and deaths. Yeah. We got all of the messaging, from the priest. And yet the Hebrew scriptures, which is why I ended up moving as I got older to Judaism, Israel, the people Israel, that the word means God wrestler. Wrestling with the divine and wrestling with what it means to live an ethical life is an invitation to explore our co-creative responsibility with the divine. And so what is it we want to co-create now? What is it that internally and around us? You know, the planet is crying out for our healing. And that is also a reflection of our societal healing that needs to happen. So lifting all of those things up in ways that is informed by tradition, but not locked into tradition. That lets go of the fear-based dogmas to reconnect with the beauty that the traditions offer us, and or to find out what it is Spirit is calling us to next. What is this paradigm shift? Where is it taking us? You know, many people have left organized religion. It doesn't mean they've left their sense of spirit. You know, there have actually been several really, big name studies like Pew Trust and various others who have looked at, there are now more people who are spiritual but not religious than there are evangelicals in this country. It is the largest and continuing to grow body in America. Europe has already been in that direction for a long time. Asian tradition has done it differently in that they have melded it beautifully, understandings from India to Tibet to China and Japan. When we look at goddesses like Kuan Yin, she started out as a male god in the early iterations, and it wasn't until China that her embodiment became expressed as the feminine. And so she's considered, the first trans deity. And yet, when we look at things like the Hebrew scriptures, the first creation story doesn't talk about a woman being taken from a man's rib. The first one is about Ha-Adam, the human. The creature was, even in some of the early, Talmudic writings, understood to be, anthropomorphic, but not male or female, a combination, somebody who embodied all genders. And so when we look at ourselves as being in the image of the divine, the first name for the divine in Hebrew scriptures is Elohim, which is a plural. It's a they. So it's inviting us to let go of the fear-based dichotomies and instead look at the tapestry and cosmic light that is dancing around us and be part of that dance.
Mm.
Well, so I love this conversation, Rivka, because I am also curious and wondering about the divine, masculine and feminine. When we talk about those concepts and the gender binary, making sure that even in our languaging that we're inclusive of all, and I hear you when you're saying of also releasing the idea that there is that when you're talking about the they with these, but also just, wondering about your perspective about that, because what kind of prompted that is I saw a post from you, I think it was on Facebook, or I read your newsletter, so maybe it was in your newsletter, about the divine feminine, and just wondering about that from your perspective.
Well, one of the things that we lost in the last 2 millennia was that embrace of the divine feminine. It's been a pendulum, and the pendulum is in some ways coming back, but there is an aspect of it, that we needed the organizing elements of the divine masculine at a time. But I want to make a distinction between the divine masculine and toxic masculinity. They are not the same thing at all. And where the patriarchy has harmed both men and women and people of other genders, is very tied to the empirical nature. You know, the Roman Empire taking over Christianity and taking over all of these different places throughout Europe and parts of Asia and parts of the Mediterranean, you know, were something that made us lose that flavor. We don't realize that in the first couple thousand years of Judaism, it coexisted not only with divine feminine images and divine masculine in partnership in the holy matrimony in the societies around them, but Asherah, there was a Canaanite goddess who had a literally place within the early temple. It wasn't until the return from Babylon that the divine Elohim Adonai and his Asherah became separated, and it became a truly monotheistic expression. So that negating of the divine feminine has been ongoing. That has more to do with power than it has to do with divine masculine. The divine masculine invited us to create community, to invite us to move into more and more complex ways of associating with one another. Whereas the divine feminine is about the nurturer. It is the crone. In this season in particular, it's about the crone. It's about that ancient elder wisdom, as well as the birthing mother. You know, in early scripture, before the complete takeover by the empirical system of Christianity, women and the divine feminine were a part of Christianity as well. Yeah. You know, our understanding of the role of Mary has been watered down to this, she just obeyed God and did what she was told. She was a leader of the church. She, as well as Mary Magdalene, were the apostles to the apostles and had actual voices within that early expression. So the divine feminine flows through us, and the divine masculine also flows through us, regardless of our gender. We, as the Easterns tell us, there's yin and yang. There's a little bit of both in all of us. I think what's different now is that pendulum that was the divine feminine focus to the divine masculine focus, we're now entering, I think, an era where the divine is no longer limited in the ways that tradition limited it. I mean, even 2,000 years ago, the Talmudic sages were noting that anything that you could say about God was automatically wrong because it was incomplete. You know, they understood that the divine, the ineffable, that source, which is the breath of life, was not just one thing ever. It was divine energy is masculine and feminine and non-gendered and inclusive, just like the mycelial network that flows underneath the earth interconnects all of the plant relatives and the tree relatives. That connection of spirit flowing through us, through Reiki energy and through prayer and through our own heart connections, isn't defined by gender. It is beyond gender. And that's the gift that young people are giving us today. And not so young people. There are people of multiple ages who are coming to the realization of, oh, I don't fit into the cultural paradigm that is masculinity or is femininity, regardless of how I was assigned at birth. The indigenous spiritual traditions, their shamans were the transgender people of their time. They were encompassing of all ways of being. And so when we talk about the divine feminine and the divine masculine, we have to also acknowledge that there is this ineffable quality to the divine that combines all genders, that combines all culturally designed ways of acting as a gender, ways that we're supposedly, that the divine supposedly is masculine in some traditions, can be said completely as that's the way you are feminine in other traditions. So it's a construct. I think one of the things that science has given us in this area that is invaluable is we now understand that gender is it's created within the mother's womb at two different places in time. Early in gestation, the hormones will determine the physiology of a male identified or female identified fetus. But it's not until the third trimester when another surge of hormones comes through that determines the gender of the brain. So when people say, I always knew I was a little boy in a little girl's body, or whatever gender they had been raised as, we know now that their truth is scientifically truth. So we have to be much more open and receptive to who does this person say they are, and how is the divine flowing through their expression. I think it's a gift from the divine that we have folks now who are helping us see beyond the dichotomies of the last couple of millennium of things having to be good, bad, light, dark, right, wrong. We're a tapestry, and that is a gift that the divine is making evident in this era.
I think that's where I kind of love that point, and that you said you don't have to put it into an either or. And I don't mean that just even in the masculine feminine. I mean that it can be that, and it can also be neither, and it can also be both when we're talking about these concepts of divine energy or whatever that means. And just also wondering and loving to have these conversations, because I think so many people in these communities, so many of us are feeling that divine feminine regaining its power. And I think that that's part of where, maybe we even get a little stuck of wanting to reclaim that within us and in everybody, regardless of gender, and in the construct. And, like you said, that healed masculinity, divine masculine. And then also wanting to making sure that we are also trying to understand what it means outside of even those terms, and making sure that, like, is that exactly, so I love that it can be masculine, feminine, neither, both, and that we don't have to put it into these ways, and also can reclaim that divine feminine that has been lost over these years.
Absolutely. I mean, for me personally, I'm a cisgender, which means I align with the gender assigned to me at birth. I'm a cisgender bisexual woman who loves the divine feminine, who gets a lot of my sourcing from the divine feminine. My spirit guides are Mother Theresa, as well as Teresa of Avila. It's Miriam, as well as Mary. It's these female archetypes and human female leaders who have been conduits of spirit. I draw on them for my own sustenance. And I then look at my beloved, who was identified as female as a baby, but at 5 announced to his parents, that he was Tom Cowboy. And they immediately made sure that he stayed in dresses and did all the girly things and praised his diminutive little girl pretty self. And so it wasn't until he was 50 that he was able to embody his divine masculinity, that he was able to accept and relish through the support of spiritual direction with our rabbi at the time, who has since passed, to reclaim the person that he knew God knew him to be. He has often said that he wouldn't be the man he is today if he hadn't been raised female, that he's able to be a better advocate for the women around him by having lived as a woman for 50 years before owning and claiming who he knew himself to be. And then I look at young people like my adult child who is non-binary. Some non-binary folks say, some days I feel female, some days I feel male, other days I don't feel any. Others, as with my child, don't define themselves by the construct of gender. They prefer to dress in androgynous ways, but they love makeup. They allow themselves to play with the constructs that society gives, but don't label themselves based on a system that doesn't speak to who they innately are. So when we look at how people are in the world, when we anthropomorphize the divine, whether that's as the feminine or as the masculine, any of the deities within Hinduism or Buddhism, or the saints within the monotheistic traditions, each of them is an archetype. Each of them is a way of expressing and connecting with that sense that we do hold the divine. And so what does the divine look like? How does the divine embody? And when we recognize that the divine embodies all of us, human and non-human siblings in this, tapestry that is Mother Earth, becomes a much gentler relationship. And I learned a whole lot and received a lot of grace by recognizing that as people like my husband and my child claim their true identities, that gives the rest of us permission to claim all of who we are. Opportunity for us to tap even more further into our own sense of true knowing and letting go of those things that have caused harm and that have constricted us, and to blossom and unfold into who Spirit is calling us to be.
Colleen, you're muted. Colleen, you're muted.
I think I'd like to also ask a really practical question
Mm-hmm.
for our listeners, as I, for one, am committed to understanding better. I'm committed to trying to work with appropriate languaging. And as you say, some of the dynamics of the language that we choose really they're so inset. At 65 years old, it's a way of speaking that I've done my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I would like to ask, more than anything, is that as we are learning and honoring all of the different people, what are the ways that we can make sure that we're being appropriate if we're speaking to a person? And if we don't know how to do that in the moment, can you just share a little bit about that for
Sure.
just a better skill and understanding? And because there are so many of us that want to learn the changes, want to learn the languaging, and don't always know how.
Sure. No, I'm happy to do that. I think one of the things that those of us who are cisgendered get hung up on is apologizing.
Oh,
Somebody will misgender someone And rather than just correcting it, we'll go, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Oh, I'm so, we make it about us. And it's the same thing that happens with microaggressions with people who are for instance, African American. And once in a while, the analogy I use with my seminary students is there's this wonderful YouTube video that compares microaggressions to mosquito bites. Because we think of microaggressions as, oh, I messed up, I didn't really mean to do that, but it's okay, but for the person who day in and day out has to correct their pronouns, or who has to say, I was actually born here. I'm, just because I'm a different colored skin doesn't mean I'm any less an American than you are. When you hear that, those intended and unintended slights that are part and parcel of the ways we've been enculturated to talk. One or two mosquito bites doesn't bother any of us. When you get 50 of them a day, you get pretty cranky. So that's I think the number one thing we need to be aware of is that when we make a mistake, correct it and move on. I meant to say that, not getting ourselves all worked up, because that's performative, and it makes the person who is non-binary or trans actually more uncomfortable, because then they have to comfort you or me, as opposed to being seen in their reality. Important study that was done by the Trevor Project, which Trevor Project specifically works with suicidality in young folk, particularly young queer folk. And it's been shown that even one person recognizing and just simply honoring who a trans or queer kid is means that person is 50% less likely to commit suicide. 40% of all trans and queer youth and adults have at least had one experience of suicide ideation, if not multiple, because of the ways our society tries to make them fit into the box that is the binary. And when you say, hi, my name is this, and what are your, and what's your name? What are your pronouns? Honoring the name that they have claimed, even if it's not the birth name that they were given, honoring their pronouns, trying, practicing with somebody else who's cis so that you get it down, but don't put it on, as we don't want to put our white fragility on to our African American siblings. We also don't want to put our transphobia on our trans and queer siblings by making them do all of the hard work. They've done the hard work. They've made a miraculous leap of faith to step into. So that's the biggest thing, is to, honor who they say they are, call them by the name and the gender that they claim. The biggest challenge people have is with the idea of they and them. Oh, it just messes up the sentence context. But I want to give you an example. We do this already. When we pick up a wallet that we have found on the street and there's no ID in it, who do we say it belongs to? Oh, I found their wallet. Who do I give this to? We've been doing this for 500 years, from Shakespearean forward, of when we don't know the identity of someone or the gender of someone, we use they, them. We just don't even think about it. What non-binary people are asking is that we think a little bit more and recognize that accepting somebody's pronouns, if it's they, them, or one of the multiple other iterations, is making them feel seen, making their truth, appreciated, and inviting the divine within them to be in relationship with the divine within us.
Well, that is very helpful. And the self-awareness of just simply, if you need to know, you can ask, but without apology, and then honor And I love the wallet example also, because that is one of the harder ones, is to restructure your sentencing into they, them from she, her, or he, him. And you're right. It makes sense from that perspective.
Exactly. And we're going to mess up. You know, I've been involved in queer rights for 45 years. My beloved and I, you know, have lived with him being a trans man for, you know, going on 17 years. And we still mess up on other people's gender sometimes. And you pick yourself up, even if it's our own child. If somebody has been misgendering them, you know, sometimes we'll fall back into, you know, particularly when my mother-in-law, who passed recently, of blessed memory, she had a really hard time with it. I'm an English teacher, I can't do that. And so when you're with somebody, you know, it's easy to fall back in to make them comfortable, and so then you have to catch yourself. But the more you can grow comfort in it, the more you practice it, the more you see the person for who they know themselves to be instead of who we want them to be. That is a gift.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. I know that it's a big question that people have and want to know more about, and how do you find out the information, and, you know, also without feeling that, oh God, I did something wrong. And I love that. Thank you.
There's some great resources online, in addition to Trevor Project, which gives people tools for how you support a trans or queer youth who is, you know, suffering from deep depression and potential suicidality. But, you know, they have important tools, but also an organization called Gender Spectrum online has some wonderful resources for not only looking at somebody else's gender, but exploring our own, because, you know, it's an exercise I've done when I've gone into congregations sometimes with folks is, you know, there's some people use what's a gender Gumby, or others use a gender unicorn. You know, there are different modalities, but looking at all the different pieces that go into what we define as gender and look at how those constructs apply to us can be really informative to how we're experiencing our relationship with the culturally determined understandings of what gender is. And that helps us become a little gentler with ourselves as well as with others. So looking up those resources, there's tons on the internet.
Well, that's great to know. And you're right. And I do think, even for myself in the past couple of years, and so grateful for this amazing younger generation that is here. And gosh, looking at my own culturally created self, and particularly working with Reiki with that, there are just so many things that I have accepted as a woman as normal. The younger generation is like, no.
Right.
And I love it because it's important, but there's just so much within myself that I just didn't know was so culturally treated. And, you know, I've been really blessed that I am in a relationship and friendships and things in community, particularly with the Reiki community, that I am free to explore and want to. You know, I love the curiosity of exploring it, but there's I've had a lot of wake-up calls in the past couple of years.
I think that's part of paradigm shift also, is as our vibrational levels change, as our understanding of the divine and our relationship with the divine change, when we can come to that with curiosity.
Yes.
You know, we have an opportunity to say, oh, yeah, this part still feels like it fits. This I don't need that anymore. That was part of my trauma. And that's where some of our work around, you know, therapeutic resources and Reiki and spiritual direction, helping people really explore their trauma and using ritual and other somatic tools to release their trauma. It frees up so much more energy to then say, oh, how does spirit want to flow through my life? How do I want to show up in my life? What is no longer serving me? And what is no longer a representation of how we have defined and boxed in not only ourselves, but the divine?
Yeah. I love that. I think that's really, it is, I mean, everything that you just said, of course. But, you know, just the idea that it's opening up. And I agree with Colleen. I'm a millennial, but obviously there have been the teachers that have paved the way for us to be able, a lot of us, I should say, I don't, that speaks with a little bit of privilege, but many of us are able to explore these areas at such an earlier age. And I love Gen Z. They are just, is Lior Gen Z?
Leora is right on the cusp between millennial and Gen.
Okay.
They were truly a millennial baby. They were born New Year's Eve of '98. So their
Okay.
first birthday, took them into the new millennia.
Oh, funny. Okay.
Wow.
That's amazing. I'm an older millennial, but I just think that, the younger millennials moving into Gen Z as they're, kind of coming of age, and I guess they are of age at this point, but you know what I mean? I
Yeah.
think that they are really amazing, and watching how they're just teaching all of us and stepping into their truth. Because like you said, that takes such bravery in this paradigm that is this way that is being paved. I mean, we still have so much to go, obviously. But as the pendulum is shifting, and these constructs that are crumbling in being built up in a new way, and just even thinking about the I liked the way that you worded the empirical side of religion, as to oppose to the true nature that so many people are, like you said, they have that wanting and that knowing inside that they want to, that they're connected to that, and that crumbling of maybe the unhealed and the unhealthy side of that, and rebuilding it in a way that is their truth, and also the truth of what it actually is, of the divine, the truth of that has been brought through the sages over the years. And the lifting back up of the indigenous ways, because those were all of these things that we talk about are within, some of the more dominant Western religions, and in the Eastern religions, some of these concepts are already a part of the culture, but in the indigenous ways, these are their truths already, and hearing them as well, and how this time frame is the starting of that. And like, I know that we have so much further to go, but watching this, and watching the passion of the younger generation, and then the teachers that have been able to get us there, like you said, you've been involved in LGBTQ rights for 45 years, and now your child is able to express their identity from the time when they were exploring that,
Right.
and that is really amazing to see and to experience, and to release these boxes of, like you said, even the divine. We've been in these boxes with this for so long. I should say, not all cultures, not all boxes of the divine. So do want to make sure that I'm saying that, but that at least in the ones that we were raised in, and those empirical Western ones that we are talking about today. It's really beautiful.
Well, I think that's one of the things that as we move away from the literalism that some of the more conservative traditions have, and really look at contextual and original meanings of language and whatnot, there is a lot of wisdom to be culled from our indigenous and even our established traditions when we get far enough back to understand that. I mean, one of my favorite examples is, thanks to the Gutenberg Bible being put into print and then all the iterations of it since then, King James especially, there was a real choice in multiple places that were about, enforcing a particular paradigm. One example is the word almighty. The word that we understand as being almighty, El Shaddai, is actually closer to great-breasted one. It is the mountainous divine energy that encapsulated Canaan. And so when we're talking about reclaiming understandings of the divine, even within the dominant culture, we don't have to dig terribly deep to see that the divine feminine and other ways of understanding our relationship with the divine, right there. Another good example is the term Yahweh. Most people think that that's a Jewish term. You're never going to hear a Jew use that term. When we see the Yud He Vav He, the ineffable name of the divine, which is not supposed to be spoken. It's not that it's not supposed to be spoken, it can't be spoken. All of those letters, Yud, He, Vav, He, are breathless consonants. And it is the breath. Life. So when we start taking apart the constructs and exploring what's underneath them, so what's up?
Yeah, can't be put into words. So I want to hear, we talked about it a little bit about the beginning, but I wanted to hear, well, I have two things that I want to hear about. So I want to hear more about the communities, but since we're kind of talking about this subject, what are some of the ways that you support healing, restoring, and that divine feminine with all people and the collective? Some of the kind of things that maybe even people that are listening can take away from this and work within themselves or with their spiritual practitioners.
Sure. Well, there are several different things. The most immediate thing that is a one-on-one thing is spiritual direction, which over the last year or two, I've as people are open to it, include more Reiki into it. And so where that might unfold is if somebody knows a particular area or incident in their life that caused the religious wounding that they are grappling with, we might send distance Reiki back into that experience and work with it that way. If somebody is instead saying, none of that even speaks to me, but I feel this yearning to connect with the divine feminine. Another way that I work with folks is I do a monthly new moon celebration. And everyone, I believe, has access to the divine feminine at the new moon. Traditionally in Judaism and in other traditions, the new moon was the time for women to be honored and set aside. We lived in tiny communities. It's when our sense of our bodies was in sync with one another, and we would menstruate together. And so it has an ancient connection. The grandmothers would care for, the women who some might suffer more than others. And that would be the time of storytelling. And so reconnecting with that sense is very healing for women today. But I firmly believe, and in fact, in my New Moon program, I invite people of all genders, because the divine feminine speaks to and through all of us. You know, when we talk about the crone, you know, we know now scientifically that the egg of the mother and the child that she will someday carry is within her own, you know, fetal self inside the body of the grandmother. So that generational dance, that's a generational relationship with feminine and each of us as our own embodied selves is open to all of us. You know, we are all connected to the divine feminine in varying ways and varying degrees. So, you know, reconnecting with the divine feminine is also about reconnecting with Earth, particularly since, you know, the doctrine of discovery in 1492. You know, we were indoctrinated to believe that the Earth is a thing for us to have dominion over rather than, you know, the things on Earth being our non-human siblings, as all the indigenous traditions have long recognized and have not lost track of. So reconnecting with divine feminine is also reconnecting with the Earth. And right now, she needs us to love her. We are not going to see a change to climate injustice and climate catastrophe until we fall back in love with the planet that feeds us and nurtures us and holds us. So the divine feminine and love of creation have to go hand in hand. So those, you know, that's one particular way that that I invite the divine feminine into more of a group environment.
Well, and I do feel that's so much the nature of Reiki energy. And in our own traditions, you know, we recently wrote the animal Reiki manuals and courses. And in that, as we were listening for what is the energy, what is it about, because originally we thought we were writing kind of skills and techniques to use with our existing Reiki, and which it is also, and many people use it that way beautifully. When the energy came in, it came in as tree of life, and that unified self of truly understanding that we are made of the earth and we are made of spirit. And one of the main concepts of it is from a journey that I did years ago with the nature spirits when we lived out on the farm out in Sandy. For those of you that don't know, Rivka lives near us also. But anyway, I was, you know, deep in Reiki journey, shamanic journey, and asking the nature spirits about an article I was going to write and for Reiki News magazine, and what did they want to say. And I was actually waiting for them to reprimand us for all the harm that we do, and to reprimand me particularly for, you know, what was I doing with my land management for the farm. It was 30 acres, so not massive, but big enough. And in Oregon, that's like a lot of plant growth. And so I was waiting for the reprimand. And what they came and said was, well, if we could teach you one thing, it would be to love yourself as much as we love you. The earth loves you. We think you're amazing. And they said, because when you love yourself, you create with love. When you believe yourself to be destructive, you create with that belief. And showed me over the course of years, it's been an ongoing kind of, again, paradigm shift, because of course we see the obvious evidence of the harm we do and the result. And yet at the same time, their instruction was to turn to love within and within all of us, and to honor humanity in the collective and the belief in that core love that is so human. So they showed me over the course of years different experiences where I really learned about that earth and the love and our bodies being made of the earth. One of the things they did talk about relative to what we're speaking of today with the religious wounding was the two major beliefs that have caused the most harm within our hearts. And one was the belief in original sin, that we are born sinners. And you said you were raised Catholic. I was raised Catholic. And you teach a child at an early age to say, pat your chest and say, I am not worthy to receive you, dear Lord. Like, who thought that was a good idea? Teach a 3-year-old. But that one, and then the one that you just mentioned about having dominion over the earth, and the misunderstanding of both of those teachings.
Yes, absolutely.
And the injury to our inherent self-worth and self-belief, and then our experience of living on the earth. And they said, you are, what the true meaning is that you are here to be in communion with the earth and with the animals, and that Reiki energy, and this is the tree of life energy that we're working with animal Reiki, that empowers that within us. But you don't have to have even Reiki to go into those paradigm shifts. But Reiki does make a difference in that, in all the levels or whatever way somebody is using it.
Absolutely. The Jewish understanding of the tree of life, the lights within that reality of the diagram that is used in Kabbalism to understand the tree of life. Each of those emanations, each of those in the Eastern tradition, it's more closely chakras, and of course, there's that wonderful article of Williams about the different energy centers being not quite the same thing as chakras, and the same conversation can be had about the tree of life in Kabbalistic understanding. But each of those emanations, each of those energies, are each ways of portals for understanding the divine. They're qualities of the divine, and they're qualities of us, and of how we move through the world, and how we move in relationship to the world around us. And that understanding that there are things happening in our conscious mind, but there are also things happening around us that we're totally unaware of, because we don't hear the pain of plant. We don't sense the memory in water. We don't have the skills yet to understand those vibrational messages that are surrounding us. But they are there for us to draw on, for us to live into. And so that tree of life, as above, so below. What we are doing here, we can pull on the wisdom of the heavens, we can pull on the wisdom of the divine, and we can pull on the wisdom of Mother Earth. And we are the conduit. The Jewish understanding of that phrase of dominion over isn't dominion over, it's Shomrei Adama. It is the guardianship, the stewarding, the protector of creation. And being in relationship with creation requires us to be open to what we learn, not just how we control. And that, I think, is going to be one of the most astounding things. And I love what you're doing in terms of connecting that with our animal brothers and sisters, as the native in this country and other indigenous traditions have shown us, they are our teachers. And we just have to slow down from our, plugged in busy world long enough to watch them. One of my meditative practices is to watch the birds that have chosen our little slice of heaven as home, and learn from them the interconnectedness between the plants and the air lifting them, and dancing around each other. There's the beauty that we can learn from them. We barely touched yet, and the wisdom of unconditional love, particularly of our domesticated, that love us regardless of what kind of day we're having or what else is going on in our lives. We can open ourselves up to those lessons. We're in this moment where there's a lot of fear, and the God of love, is who is calling us. And unfortunately, there are those who are still locked into that God of fear, and the more to change the vibration, that idea of the 100th monkey, that the more of us who are doing light work, the more of us who are opening our hearts in compassion to one another, to our animal siblings, and embodying the unconditional love they model for us, the more we can release that fear and rigidity that makes people feel like they've got to do things a certain way because there won't be enough. And what nature is telling us is she always regenerates herself. We may not have that capacity as a people as we rush towards climate catastrophe, but Mother Earth will regenerate. She will heal herself.
Oh, your sound just went off, Rivka.
Oh, am I
Can you
back?
You're back. Just repeat that last sentence.
Oh, just that the more that we can recognize that. What did I say? Now all of a sudden I lost my train of thought. First the sight, then the hearing, then what were we talking about?
I say that all the time.
That's what my mother used to say.
Mid-sentence, I'm like, what are we talking about again? Our listeners relate, I'm sure.
Essentially what I was that, when we recognize that the unconditional love that our animal friends, the interconnectedness that our plant friends are all calling us to, we can collectively raise that energy so that those who are still living in fear, might eventually be able to join, just as in the concept of the 100th monkey, that when enough of us believe and enough of us open ourselves up to the divine in ways that are life-giving instead of life constricting, there will be that paradigm shift that will take us into a new level of being and understanding. And God willing, others will really be released from their fear in the process.
Well, really, even going back to that story, it was or experience, I should say, it was so powerful and such a pivotal moment of personal healing for me. Again, the culturally created self, really kind of the song Pave Paradise and Put Up a Parking Lot, so embedded in automatic distaste. And so when that teaching came in, and it was in a really powerful way because I was deep into the journey and receiving from them and asking them, the nature spirits, what they wanted to teach us. And so it's been, really, that was probably in 2005, 2006, so long term. And I understood at that time that it would be my form of activism. It is what I can do. and contribute to is the opportunity for myself and in the ways that I walk in the world is to just simply spend time activating higher frequencies of thought, consciousness, love, and then also realizing, again, with Reiki, that I don't have to be perfect at it. And
Right.
it's, I'm not all like, I'm still not enlightened. So I still have my very human moments, but that Reiki can actually hold that intention within me, even if I have wounding, even if I have challenges in my life because of my external experiences that are occurring or have occurred or may occur, all of those things, that I can still hold that internal activism for myself. And I guess it's, Gandhi really encapsulated it in be the change you want to see in the world. And so that is what I believe I can do. And often you went to the divine feminine, and I think of the divine feminine as, receiving, and we receive with Reiki. And so often when I'm in that space where that internal intention and the external feelings, external evidence I'm seeing in the moment seem in conflict, I know what I can do is just receive Reiki and say, I'm still human and still struggling with these things.
And that's part of the dance. It's in our humanness that's where our curiosity lies. And that's, I think, why, many traditions, including Judaism, have an understanding that, as opposed to the dominant Christian idea of heaven and hell, Judaism believes that, our light rejoins the light, the Ein Sof, the no thingness of the divine that is beyond description. And that's the light of Reiki. That's the light of energy. That's the light of divine love, which, is something that our human processes is here to play with how that gets manifested. We are, there are those who believe that we come with an agenda of what is it we want to learn. And even if that isn't true, we carry with us that memory deep within ourselves of the wholeness. And that's why we yearn for it, is this knowing that that the divine source that is beyond description, that we will be enfolded back into, just like a raindrop is enfolded into the ocean. That understanding of being connected is what we yearn for, because it's our true nature. And so when we can manifest that through the things that we're trying to make happen here, we're going to fail. That's part of the journey. It's in the there was an old saying back in the day in elementary school about how, it's when you fail that you actually learn something. The idea being that, we're not going to get it right the first time or the 50th time. It's how, when we mess up with somebody's gender pronouns, you make the mistake. In Judaism, the idea of tshuva, repentance, isn't about, saying you're sorry. It's what's going to be different the next time you come to that kind of situation. That's when the tshuva becomes complete, is to arrive at the same kind of situation and make a different choice. Learn from our mistakes and grow that sense of bringing more of the divine into this world.
Can you talk a little bit more about the history of both the teaching of having dominion over the earth? You gave a specific year. And then also, I remember, I think it was you in our previous podcast with you, that you did talk about where the teaching of original sin came from.
Right. Yeah. the idea of original sin didn't even exist in Christianity for the first 200 years. It was, again, part of that influx of the dominant culture of that day, the Roman Empire, form of Gnosticism, which was a dichotomous form, and through it the Roman understanding of masculine over feminine and whatnot, started that idea of either or. It wasn't part of Judaism. It was never part of Judaism, still isn't to this day. It was not part of early Christianity. The idea of original sin was very misogynistic, and it was very pointedly anti-pagan, because the serpent is the divine feminine. It was vilifying the traditions that were still alive throughout Europe, throughout the Mediterranean, that recognized the serpent as being regenerative, as being sustainability, as being the divine feminine's kundalini working through our bodies and spirits. So taking a story and subverting it was made something even bigger by saying nature and women are bad. They're only going to lead us to darkness. And so that was already happening from the second century, third century, more likely mostly the third century forward. So that by the time they got to 1492, when Ferdinand and Isabella, we think of, that's the age of discovery. What happened in the first part of 1492 was actually the expulsion of Muslims and Jews from Spain, which the 500 years prior to that had been a time of mutuality of all three traditions, of Sufis and Kabbalists, working spiritual creativity and together and understanding the divine. And so they were so successful through the Spanish Inquisition at driving people out and making people the other, making Jews and Muslims the other, using scripture to point to the difference between people who good Christians and those who were not. They were so successful after sending so many people out of a place that had been their home for hundreds of years, that they then applied that knowledge from the Spanish Inquisition to the doctrine of discovery, which is what I mentioned about 1492, where they got the papal, hecture, from my Jewish perspective, the seal of approval from the pulpit for Spain to take over the unclaimed, world for Spain and the church. And so to do that, you tell stories that women can't be trusted. You tell stories that Jews can't be trusted. You tell stories that people with dark skin are too savage, that the earth itself is savage and therefore needs controlling. The idea that came forward into the American and Canadian idea that kill the savage, save the soul, by forced conversions, were things that they were doing in Spain prior to 1492 with the Jews and the Muslims, with conversos, with forcing people to convert, so that they would then either practice their Judaism or their Islam in secret, or they would be killed. So there's a whole progression that was about dominant culture, empire building, and toxic masculinity, that believed that the only way that European white males could feel safe and strong was by making everyone else less them. And so language and the printing of Bibles and the ways to teach, all were part of what's, the academics call it hegemony, where you make sure that everything in a society is all lining up with what you want people to believe, what you want people to fear, what you want in terms of making somebody perceived as other than. None of that has to do with spirit. It has to do with fear. It has to do with grasping. And unfortunately, that's been the pattern in the colonial era that grew out of an earlier colonial era, which was the fire, doing similar things, but not as there was still at least some, bringing in of other traditions to mix to the mix. Whereas, by 1492, it was like, it's Catholicism or nothing. And then you have the separation between Catholics and Protestants. But in both cases, it's about ensuring that everyone believes the same thing or is otherized to the point of not being seen as.
Thank you. There's another question that just came in that I'd really like to hear about. At the beginning of the podcast, you talked about the feminine saints, Mary. Can you talk about them and the different ones that you work with? And I would just love, because as you were talking about them, I'm in the work that we're doing with Holy Fire, we talk about the Sisters of the Light. And as you were talking about them, I'm like, oh, there's some of them right there. So
Right.
I'd love to know more about them.
Certainly.
Because they're all ascended masters. And
they are. And the first time they came to me was actually in a meditation in seminary. And then that was echoed in a meditation that you led in one of the classes. I don't remember which one, but where these divine feminine entities entered the Holy of Holies in the temple in Israel. And anytime you walk a labyrinth, the very center is called the Holy of Holies. It's the place where only the high priest goes, or the high priest of your spirit. And I have had several experiences now over the years where I was led into the Holy of Holies by Miriam, who is the sister of Moses, but was a prophet in her own right. She's been written out of scripture a lot, but there's still pieces of her story that are still there. She actually is the one who made his ministry possible, because she's the one who directed his little craft to the daughter of Pharaoh. So the idea that she was really in partnership, as a spiritual leader in the formation of Judaism. So she led me to the Holy of Holies, where I found the first time, and in every subsequent case, Mother Mary Magdalene, Theresa of Avila, Theresa of Lisieux, who were my patron saints growing up, Kuan Yin, and Kali. We in the West are really uncomfortable with Kali. We think of her as being this big, scary, vicious. She is considered Kali Ma, a mother, that she is the patron of time. And so the skulls that we see around her skirt are simply the generations that pass. But she's not afraid to make things happen. And so I take strength and warrior energy from Kali. I take from both Kuan Yin and Mother Mary service and compassion. They both are speakers of of the heart and being present to those who are suffering. From Miriam, the prophetic witness, speaking truth to power. In some of the midrash, the Jewish versions of parables, it's believed that that she was actually one of the midwives who tricked Pharaoh and wouldn't kill the Hebrew babies. That she and her mother were not only fostering the safety of baby Moses, but of all the Hebrew children. So this idea of standing truth to power, I draw from her. And the Theresas, each in their own right, also stood truth to power within the Catholic tradition. Theresa of Lisieux is considered the patron saint of women seeking ordination, which still doesn't happen to this day in the Catholic Church. But her mystical connection with the divine, she had a deep yearning to become a priest, and that was a sadness of her life, that she didn't get to do that, but she was still able to give over her sweet love for the divine and become a patron saint to horticulturists as well as women who are seeking out ordination. Theresa of Avila was one of the greatest mystics and doctors of the Christian tradition, and she was herself a converso. She came from a Jewish family, and so she brought all of who she was, her Jewish self and her Catholic self, and stood up to the Spanish Inquisition and stood up to the men in power to express a different way of relating to the divine. And she's the one who gives us the image of the interior palace, the crystal palace, that has many, many doorways to the divine. So each of them call to me, speak to me, guide me, and I pull on their energies, whether it's in spiritual direction, sitting with somebody who's dealing with wounds that they need to address, or whether it's celebrating a wedding, just as Mary made sure that joy happened at the wedding at Cana by instructing her son to create wine. Each of them are active partners in their own spiritual journey, and I take a lot of comfort and guidance from them.
Oh, thank you so much. I love that. It's giving me a whole new inquiry in my own spiritual work, because I meet with the Sisters of the Light, and Mary Magdalene has been coming in powerfully even in the last couple of days. And I had a recognition that I was actually baptized in the church St. Mary Magdalene. Mm-hmm. And so, it woke up this other part, but to really just have an opportunity spiritually to connect in with these beautiful, beautiful beings, sisters. Like I say, we've been referring to them as sisters of the light, brothers of the light, and listening around who they are, how they show up, and they are ascended masters of the world's religions and spiritual practices since ancient times. So all spiritual beliefs and all spiritual practices. So they come in different, often for me, they're very formless. And then also sometimes they show up in form. Kuan Yin has always been one of my great teachers. And she's the one who actually really taught me about how important it was to learn to receive, and how Reiki itself, we receive it. It's that really perfect balance of the masculine, feminine, masculine.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Ways that each of them embody elements of the divine for me. I'm reading a very fascinating book right now called The Cosmic Shekhinah. And the Shekhinah is the indwelling presence of the divine in Jewish tradition. And it is the feminine indwelling presence of the divine, regardless of one's gender in the lived world. And she flows through each of these entities. In fact, there's this book talks about the Shekhinah in relationship with Mary in particular, that as the idea of letting go of the divine feminine became more entrenched and enculturated, what we call to the divine feminine went to Mary because she was the only one left that we had permission to be in relationship with. And so as a small child, she was my guardian, who I prayed to. I never prayed to the sun. I had a big brother who was absentee. So yeah, that, I didn't need that. I went either directly to the divine or I went to the one who makes real things happen, the mom. And so for me, each of them are my divine mothers. I take their nurturance. In fact, one of my favorite meditations with them was just before my ordination, where they were all, feeding me and nurturing me and sustaining me with the resources I need to do ministry. And so their ministry flows through my ministry.
Yeah, and I feel like we are just, again, in that paradigm shift also as the human women on the planet right now. We are also learning and opening to learn what that even means.
Yes.
We started off with competing with power, men's power. And, I'm not invalidating that. I'm just saying there is, what is that feminine power? And we really are in the place of the new discovery of what that even means.
Absolutely. And it's going to mean something different now than it did, 4,000 years ago.
Right.
2,000 years ago,
Yeah.
because something new is needed.
Yes.
We have never been in a position where we risk the health of the planet. We have certainly risked our own health as human communities in the past, but we're at a precipice that, Valerie Kaur has this saying about, is this the dark of the tomb or the dark of the womb? And what we learned from the crone is that even though she, like winter, appears on the outside aged and cold and shriveled, new life is forming inside. New possibility is coming forward. We don't know what that's going to look like. And the more we can open ourselves up to possibility and curiosity, it will unfold. We just have to make space for it to, and not constrict in the ways that we have in the past as a society to, make things fit in that tight box that feels safe. They say that, women who survive domestic abuse stay in those situations because they'd rather know the devil they know than be left to that they don't know is going to be life-giving to them. And so I think that's true for all of us in a society that is drenched in trauma as we are. Keep things small, keep things safe, keep things manageable. And we try and do that with the divine. And she is not willing to be boxed in anymore. She's inviting us to something new that will take us beyond the constrictions and the fear that have become so divisive and so toxic in our current.
Well, since you are, go ahead, Robyn.
I was just going to say, we can't solve the problems from the same place that we created the problems.
Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, one of the analogies that we use is, since you're here from Oregon and Astoria, where the Columbia meets the Pacific Ocean, Buoy 10, that's what I feel like this time is, we've got the two coming together, and sometimes it's smooth and easy, and other times it's impassable.
Right, right. Well, that's that whole womb analogy is actually part and parcel of the exodus from Egypt. The word that is the original translation, Mitzrayim, was the name of Egypt in the Hebrew language. Mitzrayim means the narrow place. It's the birth canal, and that's going to be full of constriction. That's going to be full of tension and pressure and fear of the unknown. But we have to, any of us who have birthed children know that it's only going through it and releasing it that then new life enters. And so that is the analogy. Yes, we're in this time of constriction and fear and isolation, and new life, new possibility is waiting to unfold.
I will just share with you, and then I'd love for you to talk about the courses that you are offering and how people can reach you for spiritual direction, because I know people will hear this and think, oh, there she is. That's who I've been looking for. But I have been working with the descendants, and at the beginning of 2020 and all of just the upheaval and pandemic and everything. And I was working with another woman that is grandmother medicine as well. Aside from being an actual grandmother, we carry it. And went to the ancestors and said, we need your wisdom. What can we do? And they said, what you can do is go to the descendants and listen to them about what they need from you today. So recently, it was maybe about 6 weeks ago or so, I was working with another person, and this person is very energetically connected with the descendants, like, knowing the information out there. And they came in and said, well, actually, the real truth is we would call ourselves the ascendants because humanity does evolve. We do make it. And that has been, this just internal trust that, of course, you know how it is when you're in that really deep connection. You can hear it one way, but then it was in that really deep connection that has brought a level of trust. And they were also saying how important the work that we are doing right now this way in all the different traditions, not just Reiki or any of the different faiths. And you called it the interspirit communities that are developing, and the possibilities now through technology, through things like this, where we can talk to people around the world and we are not fed the information. We can find it directly from people around the world. So anyway, I just wanted to share that with you because they were very clear that, number one, the work we are doing really makes a difference. Like you say, empowering those frequencies and just giving them physicality, just empowering, strengthening so they exist. And then as they are there for all of us to reach into and be able to be connected to. And then they said, we do evolve. You can believe it. It's like, oh, thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and, that's one of the things that's being reiterated for us by folks, like Peter Levine and Thomas Hubble and the other experts in trauma healing, is that when we do our work right here and right now, we're not only changing the story for the ascendants, but we are also changing the story for the ancestors. Early on when I was doing Reiki, and before I did my levels with you, I had done first, and as you know, I had done first and second degree in the early 90s. And in those early years, and even until not too many years ago, I tended to use distance Reiki primarily for something that truly was a distance, but in current time, or something to the future. I didn't think of it very often towards healing the past. And that has been a profound part of my seminary work, was when we looked at the ancestors and our relationship with how we are playing out the ancestors' stories. And I had one situation where I had an unhealthy ancestor who had left a painful lineage, who I wasn't intending to work with, but who appeared in one of my meditations. And because it's usually recommended, and children don't do this at home, kind of thing, that we only work with the bright and healthy ancestors. But once in a while, somebody whose reputation precedes them does show up. And for about a year, I worked with sending distance Reiki to this individual who caused so much pain in my biological family's lineage. And sending it to the boy that he was before he became the wounded man who caused, hurt people. And that had profound impact on me vibrationally. And in my last meditation before my ordination, in addition to my divine mothers showing up, he showed up as a healed and holy ancestor. So the work that we do on ourselves here and now, the work that we do for the benefit of those coming after us, also creates healing for those who came before.
Yeah, we are the descendants of the ancestors, and so often the result of their hard work and the things they went through, and absolutely working within the healing. And then also, of course, the DNA and cellular memory, that as it shifts within us. And we just did a session, Robyn and I, yesterday, and we're actually posting it so that people could experience it. And that's really what it was doing, was healing the oaths and vows of the ancestors, her own soul's history, and also then, like literally changing for the descendants in this pivotal moment of those old oaths and vows, spoken through our forced, like you say, conversions and all the different things that we're in the middle of with our ancestors, and and then changing it so the descendants aren't carrying those burdens.
Right, exactly. It brings everyone's vibrational energy up, and it's part of that paradigm shift. When we can forgive ourselves, when we can forgive them and they can forgive themselves, when we can bring more of our own divine truth to light, that heals us on so many levels. And again, healing and curing aren't the same thing. Sometimes curing happens, but healing is on so many other levels that that impacts not only our own individual lives, but those lives who we come through and who come through us and who.
I just wanted to kind of quickly talk about your spiritual gatherings, because first of all, I just think it's really inspirational, because I think when we sit down with people, even though we might be even yearning for that type of connection, and I think it is one of the things that the church does well, is that communal piece that, you can have within your church community. But then also that when we sit down with people and have conversations, that's when understanding really unfolds. Even though in that situation, you have people that are all willingly and yearning to go and have conversations with people that aren't, from the same religious background, all sorts of backgrounds that they may come from. And that's part of the reason that, on a side note, that I love this podcast, because we do get to have, really, we set out time for people to have in-depth conversations with them, and it leads to so much understanding. But I would love to just hear, kind of how you're going to be, even some of the technical parts of it, like how you're going to be running it, because I feel like it might be something for people that are listening. I know that they think of Reiki circles and they might be holding those, but maybe there's even some ideas that might flourish outside of just that idea, from kind of how you're thinking about structuring it and what you're doing with it.
Sure. Well, I've been doing a variety of different individual monthly programs for a while. I started in the fall a once a month actual service that is grounded in the rhythms of a Jewish service, but is intentionally drawing on other wisdoms and other songs and other readings and other teachings that have the same resonance, that have the same, the reason I choose to have a Jewish structure to it is because the architecture, again, the things that we take that do work, the architecture is about the four worlds and about reaching higher and higher levels of being in communion with the divine and out of our stodgy day-to-day lives. And so using that architecture, but bringing in resonant tools from other traditions and whatnot. So that's been happening now on the second Saturday of each month. But what I'm adding in this next month, actually in February, is a Tuesday evening gathering, which will meld together both the energy of Reiki circle with the energy of group spiritual direction, with chanting and other tools. One of the things that we've learned from the folks doing trauma work is that a lot of the same technologies that go into ritual and that go into spirit work are actually very good at metabolizing our trauma. And it's actually, on the flip side of that, the tools of religion, even though people have become spiritual but not religious and haven't wanted to join a religion because that's, uncomfortable. The dark side is that we see a lot of people who are joining things like Proud Boys and some of these other, negative things are doing so because it utilizes some of those same technologies. When we're saying the same things, when we're breathing together, as in prayer, when we're singing a song together, that brings our energies and our resonances and our spirits in alignment. Mm-hmm. And it is a way of metabolizing trauma when we are measuring our breath and whatnot. So it doesn't have to be for conservative, it doesn't have to be for dogma. We can use those same technologies of chanting together, breathing together, meditating, telling our stories, witnessing for someone that the truth of their lived experience is one of the key ways of metabolizing trauma. Believing people for who they say they are and for what they say they've experienced and how spirit has worked in their own lives. So that Tuesday night gathering will be an opportunity to hold each other in spirit and use some Reiki technologies, some distance for when people are sharing things that are going on in their lives, but also sharing, journeying in a way to allow for people to go back into situations that need healing. one of the other things the trauma specialists have told us is that our brains don't really know the difference. Well, one of the reasons people stay stuck in trauma and stuck in a certain part of their life is our brains don't know the difference between what's really happening and what is, on that groove happening over and over again. And so ritual can play a really big role in letting us work through the things that are stuck, creating ritual that allows things to solve. So that'll be the second Tuesday of, or rather first Tuesday of every month is going to be that healing circle. The services are the second Saturday. The third Tuesday of each month is going to be a time for learning, for teaching, for looking at a variety of scriptures from different traditions and finding where they meet up, finding what applies to our lived experience in this time that we are living in, what speaks to the climate crisis, what speaks to the othering of somebody who is of a different race or somebody who is of a different gender, what is going to be useful from the wisdom traditions, and what is the wisdom of our own heart and our own soul. So exploring, some of the things that science is teaching us around how spiritual truths have a basis in science. So it'll be a time for playing with. And then on the fourth Friday of each month will be a time for us who are local, come together around the hearth, out on the patio, even in the cold, because it's covered and whatnot. But just as our ancestors did, come around the hearth, sing and chant, break bread together. It's been so long since many of us have been able to be literally in the same circle with one another. So that one is going to be an in-person gathering. All the others will either be hybrid or online. So those are the main ones. But the other big one that I think may be of interest to folks here is Sunday, February 5th is a special event. That's in the Jewish tradition, that's Tu B'Shvat, which is the New Year of the Tree, which the Kabbalists understood as a metaphor for healing the tree of life. And so it will be a time to gather online for the Kabbalistic mystical Seder, which will invite us to look at healing not only the tree of life, but all of life that we share this planet with. So those are just, some of the ways that the community, some things will be interesting to some people, some will be interesting to others. All of them are interspiritual, but because I live a Jewish life, they will have a Jewish flavor. I do draw on those traditions that have spoken to me. So, but I also am inviting in the energies of others to share with us how Spirit speaks to them and create a platform where we can explore together what each of our traditions have done to nurture us, and what new truths need to come forward to replace old dogmas.
Wonderful. And so a lot of that is online, but the ones that are in person, you're in Gresham, Oregon, which is outside of Portland, Oregon.
Exactly. And people can see what all of the different choices are coming up on my website, as well as on my Facebook page. And then generally, if I can get a good recording, then I'll put the results on my YouTube. But definitely, there's lots of opportunities that are hybrid as well as online versus in person.
And what about your new moon?
Oh yes. So the new moon is going to continue happening. We've been doing that for almost 2 years now.
Yeah.
And so that gathering is always on the new moon. So it's not going to be the same day or time of every month. I always do it in the evening at 7 p.m. But for instance, in January, it's going to be on I think it's the 21st. Let me just double check. Yeah, January 21st at 7 p.m. And that one too is hybrid. People can come and be in circle or be online. It's not uncommon a lot of folks want to just be online because particularly in these winter months, they don't want to drive out here to our neck of the woods. So,
Get a little cold with that east wind.
exactly. But in fact, this next one on the 21st, we are specifically going to be looking at the crone aspect of the divine feminine and what she can teach us about that indwelling that is so needed. We're so outward focused in our culture that we come back to the hearth, and in the center of the hearth is the heart. So we'll be playing with her on the 21st.
Wonderful. I have to mention too, the Kabbalah tree of life was definitely kind of the energy and the idea in the part of when we were looking at the tree of life in general in the animal Reiki course. It was definitely a really big influence. And in fact, in the meditation, in one of the guided meditations or the invocation, calling the invocations in the Reiki master, it does explore the idea of the channels of the central, left, right channel, as well as kind of going into that idea of the chakras and those energy centers that, we all have as not just humans, but animals and plants. And so it was a part of that, and kind of that sacred geometry piece of it.
Yes. I think that's one of the things that's continues to fascinate me about Kabbalah is the awarenesses they've had and they expressed, in the 1500s and in some parts of it to the 2nd century, are things that are just now coming into light through the quantum physicists in terms of the way energy works and the way that can source those energies, and that we are indeed energy. Our molecules may appear solid and firm, but we are all, on a molecular level, pure energy. And so learning how to dance with those energies is very, I think, central to the healing that we're all seeking.
And you have a newsletter too, don't you?
I do. I send it out to people who are on my mailing list. Sometimes I'll include a link to one of my blog posts. I don't blog as regularly as I probably should, but I always have the newsletter lets people know what's going on in my own life as well as in my ministry, and something that has arisen that I think is something that will be useful for others as well, that we want to explore. So, and always in the newsletter, it shares what the upcoming programs are for the next month.
So they can find that on your website, which is shelterforthespirit.com.
Yes.
So where they can sign up for that.
Or they can email me directly at Rivka at shelterforthespirit.com.
Okay.
And so all of your social media is either Shelter for the Spirit, or your Instagram is Rivka. So REV as in Reverend, Rivka, RIVKA. That's our Instagram. And then as she said, it's YouTube. She also has a YouTube channel where she puts some of her I'm blanking on the word, but your ministries.
Some of the services. So like,
thank you.
Some of the past dwelling in the luminous dark is the new moon celebration. So you'll find those on there. We did a peace service earlier in the year, at the time of the horrible situation in Ukraine, different services and or gatherings that we've had or can be linked in there.
And also, I just want to say too that we've had Rivka on the podcast previously too. So it was a different time. It was pre-pandemic. We were all very different people, but not so much. But also, we really went in depth in that episode about religious wounding. And so that whole concept. And so if you want to hear more about that topic, which we, talked about a decent amount today as well, but we really went into depth in that one. You can check out that episode of the podcast as well. So, yeah. All right. Well, is there anything else, Colleen or Rivka?
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, always so wonderful to have you. We always
Thank you
learn so
so
much.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for all that you do and your light that you bring to the world, it's just amazing.
Thank you. Both of you have, as you know, appeared at a pivotal time in my own Reiki journey and spiritual journey. So I hold you both very dearly in my heart.
Thank you so much. And all that you teach us. Thank you.
Right.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Again, you can reach us at reikilifestyle.com and kind of everything. So
All the things.
Robyn Benelli, Reiki, Colleen at Reiki Lifestyle, all of the above. Anyway, many blessings to all. And thank you just so much. We are grateful.